Hi, I'm Maya.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Alexis.
Welcome to Teens Choice Book Show on KAZI 88.7 FM. Today we'll be interviewing Virginia Cumberbatch. She is one of the editors of As We Saw It, the story of integration at the University of Texas at Austin. Virginia was born and raised in Austin, Texas. She was the recipient of the 2016 Anti-Defamation League and is the co-founder of Rosa Rebellion, a platform for creative activism by and for African American women. Let's get started.
I'm Alex, and first of all, I've noticed that the book doesn't have any authors and only editors. Why aren't there any authors?
That's a really good question. So one of the reasons why we decided to say editor versus author is because we believe that just as much as the work that we invested in this project, the precursors themselves also helped us really capture these stories. So some of these stories were actually written by the precursors themselves, and then we helped edit it to make sure that it was cohesive in the book. And so we really believe that this was a collective effort. And while we, yes, wrote most of the book, the precursors helped write and capture not only their stories, but the stories of their peers.
That's really amazing.
That is. Okay, I'm Alexis, and my question is, what was your first experience with racism, and how did you respond to it?
It's a really good question. I think probably my first experience with racism wasn't actually interpersonal in the sense that it wasn't something that was necessarily targeted at me, but probably something I observed sort of in the moment with my family. So I grew up here in Austin, and I recall sort of hearing the conversations of my parents purchasing the house that I grew up in, and realizing that the deed on the home that we lived in, and this is in the mid-90s, actually said that no Negroes should live here. And so, I was pretty young. I was only about first or second grade, but that is such a visceral moment that is sort of documented in my memory, is realizing that we were living in a home and living in a neighborhood in Austin that historically but currently was saying that black people shouldn't live there. And obviously that deed, didn't hold any power, but that was definitely on the paperwork of the home. So it's something that I definitely think about in the work that I do today.
Before I ask you a question, I just want to say what a coincidence that we're interviewing about a book called As We Saw the Integration into UT Texas, and also how it's also Black History Month, so I just wanted to add that too.
Yeah, very cool. I love Black History Month. I'm a firm believer that we should be celebrating our stories all 365 days of the year, but I think someone posted the other day on Instagram that, we celebrate all year round, but February is our anniversary.
So my question is, how did you track down the people that went to UT, and how did you learn more about their stories?
So this was, the book is a culmination of a lot of efforts over about a decade. So there is a group of alumni that we call the precursors, and the precursors are what we signify as sort of the first generation of black students at UT, and they're an actual organization. So they get together actually on an annual basis. And the division that I work for, the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement at the University of Texas, has been a real supporter of their work, and in fact invited them year after year to participate in the Human Sweat Symposium, which you guys read about in the first chapter of the book. And so we were able to sort of continue to meet with them on an annual basis. And then when this project kind of fell into my lap when I was in grad school, I literally would just sent out emails asking if anyone would be interested in sharing their story, and I met with some in coffee shops, others in their living room. I went to nursing homes. I went to family homes where I would sit with them and their children, and so it really was just trying to get to know them on a one-on-one basis.
My question was, do you think that some people were trying to cover up or just plainly ignore the stories of the first black students that enrolled at UT?
That's a really good question, and arguably I would say yes in some ways, right? I think, UT's definitely not alone. This happens, speaking of Black History Month, this happens all over the country where our institutional memory doesn't really match up with reality, right? And so it's really easy as organizations, as institutions of higher learning, to just talk about the convenient things, right? And so I think that's why this book is really powerful, is it forced us to sort of reconcile UT's contributions or complicitness in sort of these institutional practices. And so whether it was, you know, purposeful or not, the stories have definitely not been treated with the respect and honor that we think they deserve. And so we think this book is just one step in truly honoring a group of individuals that contributed so much to the culture and to the vitality of the 40 acres.
So it's just not like covering up a lost history, it's becoming more of a, you found this history, now you should maybe learn about it and see what
Yeah,
happened.
exactly. So, you know, the research that we did, you know, was in large part, you know, working in cooperation with the registrar's office and the Briscoe Center, right? So some of these things were there, but just not comprehensive enough and not enough detail that someone could easily read about this story. And so we hope this book is a good way of putting those things together. And we realized it was such a powerful tool to connect the current students to this history. And even, you know, you guys coming out of middle school and going into high school and hopefully into college soon, realizing that there has been a trail blazed for you. And we think that has been a really powerful message in this book.
So this book like really spoke to me, but how do you think this book will speak to other audiences, white, Latino, Asian, and other minorities?
Great question. So one of the visions of this project is to actually help connect it to these larger conversations of communities of color, or maybe as we categorize as historically underserved communities. So we've actually already facilitated a conversation that speaks to that exact question. When we hosted our one of our book talks at the University of Texas, we hosted a panel right afterwards that included one of the first Chinese American students at UT, who's actually documented as the first Chinese American born in Austin, Texas, which is kind of incredible to think about. And we also hosted a very active Latinx activist, because we realized that while this story told the story of the first African Americans to go to the University of Texas, we cannot separate that from these larger conversations of diversity and inclusion. And I think a lot of people can see themselves in these stories and their history. You know, if you take example, we realize the powerful impact that Black Panther had, right, on the country, because it wasn't just like, yes, as Black people, we were finally excited to see a superhero and a story that told us, but I speak to so many of my friends who are Latinx or who are Asian who felt that this was a great stepping stone for them, realizing that their stories could be elevated and their stories could be seen.
Because that really just opens up many doors for people.
Exactly. You know, there was some really good conversations between the director of Black Panther and the director of Crazy Rich Asians, realizing that they are assisting each other, right, in helping to dismantle systemic racism in Hollywood and give more opportunities for us to tell stories that ordinarily aren't seen.
So Alex, Alexis, and I, we all want to go to UT, and I know that I want to major in architecture there. And do you think that some of the stories in the book have made people think, like, maybe if Alexis wants to major in psychology, she could be like, oh, well, this person majored in psychology, well, I can do that too.
Absolutely, and that makes me so excited to realize that you resonated with some of the stories, or you felt inspired by some of the stories. And hook 'em, I hope you guys all apply to UT. But there are some incredible schools outside of the 40 acres here in Austin. We have a wonderful HBCU, so I just hope you guys pursue higher education in any way that you feel fit. But what's really exciting is, speaking about architecture, right? One of the stories in the book is about John Chase, who's not only the first African American to go to the School of Architecture, but he's actually the first licensed Black architect in the whole state of Texas. So if you guys know about David Chapel Church on Martin Luther King Boulevard, or Olivet Church right off of San Bernard, those were all built by John Chase, which is pretty cool. And in fact, the new building that my office is going to be in was also built by John Chase, and we're naming the building after him. So there's a strong legacy of African American architects, not only at UT, but in Austin and the state of Texas. So I hope you guys are all inspired by the precursors and by the incredible people that we have in this community, realizing that you guys can literally do everything, and you guys have the resources and the support to do it.
So what do you think UT would be like if it wasn't integrated at such an early time? Would it become integrated later?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. I think to answer your question, frankly, I think if it wasn't integrated, it wouldn't be as awesome as it is right now, right? I don't think it would be as sustainable. It's funny that you said so early, because we could argue that it should have been a lot sooner than it was, right? If you think about it, your parents were probably born right after, or a decade so after the precursors being integrated. And so that we're less than 2 generations away. That means that could be your grandparents, right, or your great-grandparents. So arguably, it wasn't soon enough. And arguably, there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure that students of color feel not just that they are on campus, but they feel included in the campus culture. And so that's a lot of the work that I get to do every day alongside my peers in the Division of Diversity and Community Engagement.
If you're just joining us, I'm Maya.
I'm Alex.
And I'm Alexis.
And today we're interviewing Virginia Cumberbatch, one of the editors of As We Saw It. And thanks for listening to Teen's Choice Book Show on Below Zero on KZA 88.7 FM. Alexis?
Before I ask my next question, I would like to say our older brother, Alex, has older brother. He goes to Cockle School of Engineering at UT. So he is a Longhorn, so we want to follow his footsteps as well.
That's awesome. Well, there's a saying, we're at college, right? So you guys are already legacies, right? So you're already connected to people that are at UT, and so that's really exciting, and I hope that he's having a good experience, and that you guys are continue to be inspired by the footsteps that he's paving before you.
So my next question was about Human Sweat, who was in the first chapter of the book, As We Saw It. And I said, when sickness struck Human Sweat, do you think people were accusing him of being a quitter since he had to withdraw from the school due to his ailment?
That's a question that I certainly can't answer on behalf of Human Sweat, but I think what's more telling, whether or not people thought he was quitting, but you realize the wear and tear that racism has on people. It's not just emotional, it's psychological and it's physical, right? And so I think what it really helped us understand is that the precursors weren't just enduring the stresses of being college students. They were enduring the stresses of being college students and the stresses of being de facto activists and the stresses of being community organizers to really make a place for themselves and for their peers. And that is still going on today. We have some incredible voices and activists, and both here at our local level, on a national level, that are on the front lines on our behalf, on our community's behalf. And so I think it's really important that even you guys, as you guys become advocates in your own right, that you also take care of yourself, that you realize that you can't pour into the community if you're not, taking care of your health and your mental health as well. So by no means do I think Human Sweat was a quitter. I think he created an incredible opportunity for all of us to be able to participate in the work and the space of the University of Texas.
So I'm very curious in why Herbert Reeves, Doc, helped the football program for decades, if there was a great amount of segregation prevalent, and there weren't many people who ever congratulated him or gave him appreciation for what he has done. So
you're talking about Henry Reeves. They called him Doc. So we don't have a ton of information about his life just because it was so long ago, right? It was in the late 1800s, and you guys can imagine if we haven't done a great job of documenting the story in the 20th century, you probably didn't do a great job documenting it in the 19th century. But you know what? I think, Henry was not alone. There's a lot of Black people who, despite the immense pain of having to endure racism and segregation, they did what they did because A, they loved it, or B, because it was a part of being able to support themselves and their families. And so he had a steady job helping to manage the equipment of the football team at the University of Texas. And so part of that was just maintaining his livelihood. But I think, despite clear racism and segregation, I do think that he was truly appreciated by the team. You could tell just in the few stories that we have that players really enjoyed having him be a part of their organization. And so I think he felt that in a way, and he felt useful.
Yeah, because I looked more into that of other people who helped, and that was just such a long time ago too. In the 1800s, that really shocked me that y'all found stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just the cool part of research in general. And, you know, as you guys move into high school, you'll do a lot more of that. It's just, it's such a cool experience to just learn about stories, right? So that for me was one of the greatest parts of this whole process of book writing was getting to find hidden gems and stories that maybe hadn't been fully fleshed out, and then connecting and weaving them together to create a more cohesive collective narrative. So for me, the research part of the book writing process is actually my favorite.
I actually have a question for Alex and Alexis. Do you guys think that reading the book has helped inspire you or influenced your decision more to go to UT? Because I know it has for me.
Well, in a way, yes, because I've heard that UT doesn't have as many black students as they, in my opinion, should, because it's a small percentage. So this book has kind of inspired me to try to become a Longhorn when I'm older, so I can make the percentage could go up, and more people, when they read this book, will try to enter as well.
Yeah.
Like, I looked on the percentage of black students who went there, and it's like a very small. It's like somewhere between like I know it's under like 20%.
Way under 20%.
Yeah, wait, is it like 5%?
Yeah, it's 5%.
Yeah, 5%. And then with other minorities not even taking over the main population either. So that was really odd to me, and I felt like we still have a lot of work to do with UT and
Definitely.
with fighting racism and letting the school invite and inviting more minorities to come at UT to help our program.
Well, first of all, I'm just so impressed and inspired that you guys are already observing these things and wanting to be a part of reconciling them. So thank you guys for just being so active in your curiosity. So the fact that you observe that, yes, UT is not where it should be in terms of representation, but also wanting to be a part of that is really encouraging. So yeah, and it's not just about getting students to campus. It's making sure that once they get to campus, they get an equitable experience, right? And so that's something that I know that they are committed to, and I hope that we continue to make waves in making sure that UT is not just a diverse space, but it's an inclusive and equitable space.
So how do you think all the bigotry Sherry Taylor went through helped her become the first African American to graduate from UT with a master's in psychology?
Okay, so you're talking about Beulah Taylor? Is that who you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So Beulah Taylor is that was actually one of my favorite stories because I think one of the cool things about writing, right, you guys probably have experienced this, right, in writing book reports or some sort of research paper where you start off with your thesis, right, or you start off with, you're like, okay, I'm going to write about this, and then you start doing research and you're like, well, I might have to change things. That's not exactly where I thought the story was going to go. So when we originally interviewed Beulah Taylor, it was actually at the request of her daughter, Betty Taylor. She was just saying, you know, my mom was really instrumental. And then by the time that we interviewed her, or finished the interview, we realized it was such a bigger story than just her. At one point, 5 out of the 10 of her children actually were enrolled at UT at one time, which we can't verify, but we say has to be a record, right? And what was so incredible about her story is that she was so committed to education. So she actually went to Houston-Tillotson first, which was the first, not only the only HBCU in Central Texas, but it's actually the first institution of higher learning in all of Central Texas. So it's actually older than UT. So she went to HT, she got her teacher's certificate, and then just realized how important having psychological support for students, particularly students of color, was. And so she went back to school and enrolled to get her bachelor's, and then she got her master's in psychology, and then became the first counselor on campus that was black. And so her story, I think, is just so inspiring because it's a demonstration of someone who wasn't just about her own education, not just about her children's education, but she was really committed to the education and the mental wellness of students of color. And so her legacy, I think, is so incredible, and I think no doubt inspired her children and now inspire, many other children.
Next question was about forming a Black Greek life. As you know, there are Black sororities and fraternities at UT currently, but back then there was Mama Duran, who's one of the house mothers there. And my question was, since Mama Duran was a house mother, don't you think that maybe she was trying to prepare her sorors to become leaders?
For sure. So Mama Duran, also, I keep saying my favorite story, so apparently they're all my favorite stories. But I think Mama Duran was another woman who came from Houston-Tillotson. So there's such a connection between those two stories. But Mama Duran was really hired to help students of color sort of integrate themselves into college life, realizing that it was going to be really difficult. They couldn't live on campus at the time, and so she really helped make the spaces they lived in a home. And I think, Greek life across the country has served as such a wonderful space to nurture and empower Black women and men. And so I think she was not just their dorm mom. She was their mentor. She was their counselor. She was their mother away from home. And so I think regardless of anyone's sort of Greek affiliation, she was certainly training all of them to be leaders. And there's, a part in the book where we definitely share more about that. When you could tell that all these kids that were coming out of her care were the ones to protest in the dormitory. And she was such a big part of supporting them and doing that. So and every precursor that I interviewed who had an interaction with Mama Duran gave so much credit to not only Mama Duran for helping them on a day-to-day basis, but for the fact that they graduated. They gave so much credit to her for giving them a safe haven so that they could make it through their 4 years. And so she definitely invested so much in making sure that these students weren't just graduates, but they were future leaders.
Small facts, our older brother who goes to UT, he lives at Duran Hall.
Oh, wow.
So I saw a plaque of Mama Duran. I was like, oh, who's that? No, I got more sense of who she is now.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that.
We always go
Really?
over there
That's
to
so
visit
cool.
now.
Yeah, so they named one of the dorms after Mama Duran. And in fact, to give you a little bit more context, her nephew is a film producer out of LA, and he's actually producing a film about her life. And it's going to be at South by Southwest this year. So I'll make sure you guys get more information about that. But that's really cool.
So what encouraged, Peggy Holland?
Yes.
So, what encouraged her to keep striving? And, what kept encouraging her to strive and finish school with all the setbacks that her school provided?
That's, again, something that I think is shared a little bit in her story. She helped write that, her own chapter. But I think, you could ask that question about so many of the precursors in the sense of, why would you want to continue to endure such hardship at a space that wasn't welcoming? And I think for a lot of them, when you interview them, one of the common threads was because they wanted to get an excellent education. And UT at the time had a lot of academic spaces that weren't being provided at HBCUs, but they also wanted to do it in their home state. So there were options, right, for they could have gone to some Ivy Leagues on the East Coast or some incredible schools on the West Coast, but there was a sense of pride to be educated in Texas. And so, I think Mrs. Holland, whose husband she actually met at UT, Colonel Leon Holland, I think they both endured because they wanted to not only better themselves intellectually, but they wanted to take those great resources and invest it back in their communities at home. And you guys will realize this when you go off to college, that, and particularly during this time period, it was very rare for people, if you went to a place for school, you were most likely going to end up staying there and making a home. And so for a lot of folks, there was sort of a trepidation to leave the state of Texas because they wanted to be close to their family and they wanted to go back to their communities and be a part of teaching the next generation or, practicing medicine there. And so I think for a lot of them, UT was the only way to do that.
I actually have a question for everyone. Do you guys think that African American history should be taught in elementary school, or middle school, or high school, or do you think it should be an optional course or just taught in college?
I feel like it should be taught throughout throughout like all the years, because there's no point of it to being optional. It shouldn't be like a forceful, just talking about it towards your peers or other people.
Yeah,
That's really
because
important.
when we were younger, like school, they would like do a brief little speech on it and we'll just move on. I think if we enforced it more and not like harshly to any other kids, just like all age groups, it'd be fine. Nothing will be
Yeah, and I also think not just African American history, but also like all cultures, like giving history about everyone and not having someone feeling not included and having their history taught to the rest of the school.
I think you guys should be teaching the course because you guys know, you guys are right on the money in terms of how this should be taught in education. So I'm really excited that you guys are starting to think about these questions.
So how did Bill's family setting high standards in education for him help strive to do his best and deal with racism at the university?
So I think you're talking about Bill Lyons.
Yes.
So Bill Lyons, another one of my favorite people. He was so instrumental not only in creating a space for Black athletes, but for Black males at large at the University of Texas. And I think it was for a lot of these students. They had incredible families that had prepared them well to not only survive a place like UT, but thrive at a place like UT. And so I think Bill Lyons definitely came to UT with those leadership skills that no doubt were cultivated in his home. And I think what's so wonderful about his story is you realize how generous he was with his time. So he actually came to UT as a basketball recruit. He had a scholarship, and through injury, he couldn't play anymore. And for a lot of people, that would be such a step back, setback. And perhaps you don't want to pursue school with the same vigor, but instead he became such a resource to his peers. He became such a leader. He tutored so many students that otherwise probably, I've talked to a lot of peers who said I probably would have failed without Bill's help, and not only that, but he became such a supportive force in helping to recruit Black athletes to come to campus because it was so important that they saw people like them that were already there and that were thriving. And so I think no doubt, just like you guys, I'm sitting up here so impressed with you guys, not just because of the incredible questions you've asked, but because you can tell you guys are such leaders in your own spaces, and I have no doubt that's because of your parents and the great sort of values that they've instilled in you guys. And so I think family is so important, and I think it helps all of us create a foundation for how we want to pursue our life, and more importantly, how we want to pursue our life purpose.
Right. And my last question was about Dorothy Cato, another Black woman in this book. And my question was, what do you think inspired her to attend a majority white school, UT, during such a segregation than any other school that accepted Black students, like HT or another?
Yeah, I think, similar to what I shared before in terms of people wanting to be educated in Texas, I think for Dorothy or Dr. Cato, it was specifically what she wanted to pursue, which was music. And a little fun fact, at the time UT was way less expensive than Houston, Tilton, or any other HBCU, so it was actually an economic decision for a lot of students, in the sense that yes, I would love to go to HT or maybe Prairie View or another school that was integrated like Rice at the time or something like that, but UT was so less. I'm going to blow your mind, actually probably more likely to blow your parents' mind. At the time, throughout sort of the 50s, 60s, it was $25 a semester, guys.
$25?
$25 a semester, right? I'm going to get 12 degrees if that was the case today, right?
Wow.
So for a lot of folks, it was an economic decision, which is tied back to their family. What could they afford? What would allow them to get a degree, but also, not break the bank?
And back then, $25 was a lot. So
$25 was a lot, but still a lot more affordable than the $100 or $1,000 that some other schools were. And so for a lot of, UT is an incredible institution, irregardless of sort of the pricing. But for a lot of students today, they stay in state and they go to UT because it's way more affordable than some of these other institutions.
I would also just like to add, I noticed how for a lot of the people you said that was your favorite person. I can definitely relate whenever I'm reading books like, oh, that's my favorite book, oh, that's my favorite school subject. I like a lot of things too.
You know, it's hard when you're like, oh, they're all so incredible, right?
Yeah.
How can you choose one?
Exactly, and I think it's also sometimes to know about our personality where we gravitate to so many different things. We can't just, focus on one thing because there's so many exciting things that we could be a part of.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Virginia Cumberbatch. We're your hosts, Maya.
Alex.
And Alexis. And thanks for listening to the Teen's Choice Book Show.
I'm KAZI, I'm below here. And don't forget, Virginia Cumberbatch was one of the editors of As We Saw It.
Have a great day and a terrific Black History Month and a hearty Valentine's Day.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks for coming.